Most founders think they're stuck at 100K a month because of the leads. They blame the ad account, the market, the economy, the closers, and the quality of appointments. But after working on multiple sales teams, doing well over multiple seven figures a month, I can tell you that's almost never the real problem. The real problem is the founder accidentally built a sales team that can't scale without them. And once you see these 6 problems, you can't unsee them. I'm gonna walk you through every single one in detail and what to do about each one so you can stop blaming the leads and start scaling the part of your business that's actually broken. Let's get right into it. I'm going to cover the 6 problems killing 100K a month sales teams right now and what's stopping them from scaling and the order that they usually show up in. Here's the first problem. Most founders are still a part of the sales team when they're over 100K a month and trying to scale. There's a few capacities this can actually show up in. So obviously the most simplest one is they're still on sales calls themselves. So they're either still taking sales calls, they haven't been able to replicate themselves, or the closers they brought on aren't able to convert high enough where they feel obligated to keep jumping in and get back on the phones. Or better yet, maybe you are managing a closer, maybe they're doing all right, but you're still stuck in the day-to-day where you're listening to recorded sales calls, you're helping them manage their CRM and pipeline, you're having to hop on weekly meetings, train them, do role plays, and make sure that they're actually doing their job. Because here's the reality of the situation. When you scale a sales team and you have sales reps, they will almost always skip admin work. Yes, you will get killers that can get on the phone and convert PIFs, but what's also going to happen is they won't do EODs, they won't move leads over in the CRM, they won't respond to current customers, they won't follow up with potential customers, and you're in a situation where you just have to micromanage them. And as the founder in the face of the company, one, you can't end up on sales calls for the rest of your life because physically, when you scale the marketing budget, you don't even have the calendar availability to actually even take on the additional calls that will come through from your marketing efforts. And then on the other hand, you can't really manage being the face of the company, in charge of the marketing, the fulfillment, the customer support, and be a full-time sales manager. You just end up wearing way too many hats, and then there's physically no way to continue to scale the business. Because once again, if you just try to crank up the ad spend, what's going to happen is your sales team's going to underperform because no one's monitoring them, no one knows what's going on, and you don't even have the bandwidth to onboard new closers, train new closers, and get them up to speed where they can even convert close to where you're at now. Here's the other reality of the situation. Usually founders will expect their closers to sell exactly like them. This is wrong for so many reasons. One, you are the figure of authority in your business. So you could literally have no sales process, even be bad at sales. And the reality is you're still likely going to close better than any sales rep you ever hire. I know this is really hard for a lot of owners and founders to understand, but the reality is you have utter confidence and conviction because you're the one actually delivering. So even when you hire a closer with years of experience, if you try to put them in the same exact sales ecosystem with the same exact sales process, give them no foundation and no support, and expect them to just close the same anyways, you are going to be in for a very rude awakening. So first things first, you need to get yourself out of the sales team, out of being your best closer, and out of being your own sales manager. And this directly ties into the second problem because when you are the sales team, usually the tracking is a complete mess. So here we come to problem number 2. And I can't tell you how many times I hop on calls with owners and founders that want to outsource their sales to us, and they have literally zero tracking in place. They may even have 2 to 3 sales reps on already right now, doing a few 100K cash collected a month. They don't even know what their conversion rate is, their DPL is, their no-show rate, and their cancellation rate, and they're flying completely blind. Let's talk about close rate for a second. Why is close rate one of the most misleading metrics? Well, it's because a lot of times people will track close rate, but they won't track DPL. DPL stands for dollar per lead. Really what that means is you just take the cash collected, so the total cash collected from a rep or the sales team, and you divide it by the amount of booked calls that are actually on the calendar. So let's say you collect $10,000 in cash and you have 10 booked appointments. Well, 10,000 divided by 10 is $1,000 DPL. What's interesting about this is you may have two closers. One has a higher conversion rate, but the other has a higher DPL. Well, you might ask yourself, isn't the guy with the higher conversion rate doing way better? The answer would be no, because the guy with the higher DPL is actually more profitable to your company. The main difference is one guy might be closing a ton of deposits, payment plans, or your lower ticket offer, while the other guy is actually collecting more PIFs and more cash up front per each booked lead on the calendar. So it doesn't really matter if the other guy's closing more, because the other closer is bringing in more cash for every single dollar spent on your marketing efforts. Let's talk about the other aspect of conversion rate, which is people only tracking shown call conversion or offers made conversion. I cannot begin to describe how much of a mistake this is and how much it sets your sales team up to make a bunch of excuses and blame external circumstances outside of yourself. I am not saying all sales reps do this. There are some really, really good guys out there that have a lot of integrity and take a lot of accountability for their results. But what happens is when you aren't held accountable to people showing up or people you quote unquote felt like making offers to, well, what can you do as a sales rep? You can just not make an offer, right? If you're having a bad day or the call's not going the way you want, you can just not make an offer. It doesn't go towards your conversion in DPL. And then there's zero accountability for that conversation, especially if no one's reviewing the sales calls. That's a pretty significant problem for your business. Here's the other problem with no-show rates and not tracking them and not adding them as a metric with conversion. Well, if 5 people don't show up to the call, what incentive do I have as a sales rep to reach out to them, follow up, and get them back on the calendar? Obviously, yes, I want to make more money. I should want to make more money. But we know that's not the reality with all salespeople and human beings in general. They tend to take the path of least resistance. So by holding them accountable to no-shows and cancels, you further incentivize them actually reaching out to those leads, trying to get them scheduled back in, and getting those deals closed. The reality is, if you can't tell me what your no-show rates are, your cancellation rates are, your conversion rates, your DPL, and so on, how are you going to fix any problems in your business? Because what if you have a 50% show-up rate right now and you don't even know it's a problem? It just feels like it's decent, but you don't actually really know. Then you calculate the numbers, and like I said, you end up at 50% show. What if it's a 40% show-up rate? What if it's a 30% show-up rate? What if show-up rate is the biggest bottleneck in your business, and literally all you need to do is have closers run pre-call confirmations where they call their leads after they schedule an appointment, and you could further increase your show-up percentage by another 10 to 20%. Well, the reality is, if you're not tracking that, how would you ever freaking know? Here's another component of this. Let's say you have a sales team of 5, 10 sales reps right now, and you don't know anyone's conversion or DPL. Well, let me ask you, how do you know who's number one on the sales team? Is it, Mike seems like he closes more deals than the other guys. Sam seems to not perform the best. Well, it's really just a guessing game at that point, because what you might find is one of your sales reps is taking significantly more booked appointments. And that's why it seems like overall he actually closes more cash. But then when you actually calculate the numbers, you find he has one of the lowest conversion rates on the team, and the only difference is he's doing way more volume. Now, the problem for you as a business owner is you're paying for him to do all of that volume. So either way, that money goes out the door when you could have sent it to a different rep on the sales team and actually gotten so much more cash out of your marketing efforts. So the bottom line is, start tracking your numbers. Start tracking your sales team's performance like Facebook and Meta track your ads performance. Once you have visibility, the next problem becomes so clear. It's how the founders and owners actually treat the sales reps and the people that are running their sales calls. Why does micromanaging closers backfire every time? Well, there's so many reasons for this. One, they're 1099. They're contractors, at least for the most part. There's obviously sales floors, there's obviously companies and organizations that run an employee-based model. But for the most part, commission-only salespeople are almost always 1099, especially if you don't want to pay some absurd taxes and all sorts of other things. Now, the reality is, if they're 1099 or commission only, they're paid on performance. You can't necessarily sit there and tell them what to do if they're getting results for you and your company. And the reality is, you probably shouldn't. What I mean by this is you need structure, you need responsibility, and you need accountability. You need to be running multiple sales team meetings every single week. You need to be listening to multiple sales calls every single week. You need to be role playing with your sales reps, checking the CRM, making sure they're actually following through with their work. But you also don't need to be in their face tweaking out on them all day, especially if they're getting tons and tons of results for your company, bringing in shitloads of cash, and their KPIs look excellent. There's no reason to be blowing them up, badgering them. The main goal from there is just to support them and help them remain consistent, especially if they go through a slump or fall off track. And on the other hand, if they're not performing, then you do want to be there to continuously help them. But at the same time, you can't fix something that's broken. So you got to come to terms when it's time to replace them and actually find the person who's going to be the right fit for your business. So what should the founder's job actually be? Your job isn't to sit there and babysit closers all day. You, bottom line, do not have the time for it. And if you are your own sales manager, then you are the bottleneck of your own business. Your job is to build systems that hold people accountable and help them perform, whether you're sitting there hovering over them or not. You build real tracking, real scoreboards, real data, so you know where every single sales rep is on your team at all times and can help them based off their actual performance and not just bombarding them for no good reason. Why is having no bench a fatal weakness for a company and any sales organization? Well, just to put in perspective, if you only have enough sales reps to maintain your current calendar's availability, what happens when someone goes on vacation? What happens when someone underperforms? What happens when someone quits? And what happens when lead flow increases? Well, you end up in a position where even if someone is underperforming, you're essentially forced to just force feed them leads and booked appointments and continue to give them calls, even though they're actively burning your leads and your dollars every single day. The other issue is you create an environment of abundance instead of competitiveness. Now, I know in theory that sounds like it should be a good thing, right? Like you'd want abundance for your team, your organization, and so on. Here's the problem. When closers are constantly packed with leads, even though they're not performing, they're not putting in extra hours, they're not putting in the work, they're not following up with leads, they're not following up with no-shows, you're essentially rewarding them for not doing their own job. And that's a pretty significant issue, because what that tells them is they could basically do fuck all or do the bare minimum, and they're still gonna wake up with a completely packed calendar the next day, even if they're last on the sales team scoreboard. What you want to do is have a bench of A players and recruiting pipelines where you can continue to bring on new sales reps as needed, or have people who are onboarded and ready to be turned on when someone stops performing, when someone takes a vacation, or when maybe someone's not making the cut and you need to fire them. Because we're talking about abundance for the closers, but what about abundance for you and your organization? Because if you're in a position where you can't fire a rep and reliably bring on another A player, you're essentially at their whim where they can do whatever they want, whenever they want, and you're just gonna have to deal with it, even if they're losing you money every single day. Because at least a warm body on the calendar is better than completely terrible results, right? Well, the reality is you shouldn't have to deal with either. You should have A players ready to go where you can rotate out the bottom performers consistently, but then also be a bit ruthless when needed and hold people accountable to a higher standard. It also creates an environment where if they know they underperform, they don't automatically get a packed calendar. Well, what happens then? They're going to be motivated to continue to perform because they know they won't get enough booked calls if they decide to just do whatever they want. what does constant recruiting actually do for a sales organization? It puts you in the seat of abundance as the business owner. And what happens then is you don't have to be desperate for any random sales rep that just finished their first sales training program, have zero experience, have zero results, and you throw them on the calendar praying and hoping that they just magically decide to figure it out. It puts you in a position where you can consistently move KPIs forward, move the goalpost forward, and hold the team to a higher standard, because they know at the end of the day, if they decide not to perform, not to continue to push, there's a real chance they might be replaced by someone who does. Why does the sales process and the sales team collapse the moment volume increases? Well, this ties back to the last point, where once volume picks up significantly, it becomes much more difficult for sales reps to completely put in their full effort for every single booked appointment and every single lead. If they're completely packed in their schedule, it's going to be very difficult for them to be consistent with pre-call confirmations, with following up with their no-shows, with making sure they're doing thorough and solid discoveries on every single sales call, because by call 10 or 11, they're completely fatigued from the day and they're basically just going through the motions and pushing through. Then cash collected goes down, DPL and conversion go down, and when you as the owner ask what's going on, you're spending more money than ever on marketing. Why are you actually making less, or your ROAS is going down? Oh, it's the leads. But then when you actually pull up sales calls, you find they're skipping steps, they're skipping process, they're not doing consequence, and they're not staying in objections the way that they were before. So not only is this where you need a robust recruiting pipeline and a real bench, but you actually need real systems. You need to create automations and processes that actually support your sales team and your sales reps. You need SOPs for confirmation systems, outbound follow-up, long-term nurture, reporting, recruiting, call reviews, leaderboards, pipelines, and accountability. Essentially, what you need is real SOPs where when things get hectic and chaos overwhelms on a day-to-day basis, everyone knows what the protocol is, what the system is, what the process is for each sequence in the sales process and with the sales team. You need automations where clients are getting pre-call confirmations as soon as they schedule, or if they are moved to no-show, they're actually getting texts and emails, or if someone purchases a low-ticket product, but they never end up booking a call, you know exactly how to reach out, exactly what to text them, exactly what to email them to engage the prospect, get them to schedule, and actually close. You can't just hope and pray your sales team magically figures it out. Yes, you can and should hire A players that have the capability of figuring some of these things out and doing it for themselves, but you have to take responsibility as the business owner and not just expect everyone's going to magically make it happen, and put real SOPs and processes in place so every single rep knows exactly what they need to do on a day-to-day basis. Not to mention, you need to be considering your funnel and the steps a client is actively going through before a call. Because if they're maybe watching a part of one video after clicking an ad at 2 a.m. last night, and you expect your rep to have a chance of converting that lead, well, good fucking luck. Maybe back in 2018 that was possible, but sales resistance is at an all-time high, and you actually have to build real trust with your leads if you expect to close them on 10K via a one-call close. And this also ties back to you not being the bottleneck of your own business, expecting your reps to close that way just because you could. Remember, it's always going to be easier for you as the business owner to be able to just make it work despite any system, any process, any SOPs, but you can't expect the same thing for your sales reps at scale. If you're agreeing with any of this, the last problem explains why sales teams never scale and why most founders never fix the first 5 that we talked about. And this one is the most uncomfortable to hear. Why do most founders avoid building any real infrastructure? Well, I'll tell you why. It's boring as fuck. It pretty much comes down to doing the boring shit day in and day out. Yes, everyone thinks closing deals is sexy. Yes, everyone thinks collecting cash is fun. Yes, everyone wants to see the big numbers in the payment processor and on the scoreboard or in the sales notification. But what they forget is that it's the work day in and day out that actually makes it possible and a reality. It takes consistent call reviews. It takes consistent sales team meetings. It takes consistent role plays. It takes building out sales team resource docs, sales team onboarding docs. If I told you how many sales calls I've listened to in my life, you probably wouldn't believe me. And if you've listened to sales calls before, you know how absolutely monotonous that shit is. Yes, you can use prompts to plug that into Claude, ChatGPT, and so on. But the reality is, as the business owner, you always need to be willing to get in the trenches, pull calls up, actually spot check things, and figure out what the fuck is going on inside of your business. And what actually changes when a sales team infrastructure is finally built? Well, I'll tell you, marketing becomes so much more profitable. The closers perform so much better. Your clients are so much better taken care of. And you have a process that you don't have to micromanage or freak out about every single day for the rest of your life or the rest of the time that you run this company. And you can actually take a vacation knowing you have a real system and a real process in place that will generate you income and cash every single day, no matter what. And the best part about this is once you finally have a baseline, once you finally have consistency, now you can really optimize. Now you can really build, and now you can really scale. Because if all you're doing is firefighting every single day, trying to figure out what to do about availability, trying to figure out how to replace your sales rep, trying to figure out how to get your closers to actually put deals over the line, then you can never really focus on any meaningful growth or actually optimizing what's in place to make the whole system more profitable. Now that you've seen the 6 problems that are keeping you stuck around 100K a month, 200K a month, 300K a month, here's the truth no one wants to hear. It usually isn't a marketing ceiling or a lead ceiling, it's a founder ceiling. And until you remove yourself as the bottleneck of your own company, the number doesn't move very far. If you're ready to build a sales team that actually scales with you, the link is in the description on where to start. We'll take a look at your numbers, show you exactly where the bottleneck is, and walk you through what to install first. We'll see you on the next video. Don't forget to subscribe.